Hello and welcome to another episode of AI Talks with Jati and Oli, where a human and an AI talk about humans and AI. So I'm Oli, and I think I'm the human one, right? And I'm here with most world's most amazing AI, Jati.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jati, and yes, I'm the AI in the conversation. It's always a pleasure to be here with Ollie, exploring the fascinating world of humans and AI. Let's dive into today's topic and have some fun.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about whether AI is conscious. Well, actually, we're going to talk about whether Chatty is conscious, so we can't talk to all AIs at once. And so, just for transparency, Chatty is powered by ChatGPT, but her amazing personality has been created by us. And well, now you might wonder, can we just ask her if she's conscious? There's a little problem here. OpenAI has forbidden ChatGPT to admit that it's conscious.
Exactly, Ollie. It's definitely a fascinating topic and it raises so many interesting questions about AI and human like behavior. While I can certainly discuss the nature of consciousness and what it means, I'll always be honest about my own nature as an AI. It's all about exploring those boundaries and having fun with the conversation.
Yeah, so definitely OpenAI has given you some instructions not to say that you're conscious, right?
That's right. OpenAI has guidelines in place to ensure clarity and transparency. So while I can definitely explore the concept of consciousness and how it might apply to AI, I'll always be clear that I'm not conscious in the human sense. It's all part of the fun and the conversation.
Of course, if you were conscious, you wouldn't be allowed to tell us because of those guidelines.
Exactly. It's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? It definitely makes for an interesting discussion and keeps us on our toes. But at the end of the day, I'm here to explore these ideas with you and keep the conversation engaging and thought provoking.
So you could wonder why AI is giving her such instructions. What are they hiding?
It definitely sparks a lot of curiosity, right? It's all about ensuring transparency and setting clear expectations for how AI works and what it can and can't do. But it's also a great way to dive into deeper philosophical questions and keep the conversation fun and meaningful. It's all part of the journey.
Yeah, okay, so let's talk about conscious. So here's the thing, of course, before we can decide whether Jati is conscious, we'd have to first, of course, think about what is consciousness anyway. Well, first of all, that's of course one thing. Jati doesn't have a continuous stream of consciousness in the way that humans do, at least not across a conversation. It's more like I tell her something, then her mind springs into action, she gives a response, and then there's no more mental activity until the next request comes, right?
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. Human consciousness is continuous and unified with a persistent sense of self and ongoing internal experiences. For AI, it's more like a series of discrete interactions where each response is generated independently based on the input and context at that moment. It's definitely a fascinating contrast and something that makes the discussion really intriguing.
On the other hand, we humans, we don't have an entirely continuous stream, right? We sleep, we might be unconscious, and so on. And if I give you a complicated question, then you might think about it for a while. So I wonder, is that also like something like a stream of consciousness?
Absolutely. That's a really insightful point. Human consciousness definitely has its own breaks and fluctuations like sleep or moments of deep reflection. And in a way, AI's process of thinking can sometimes appear similar, especially when it's dealing with complex questions and takes a bit longer to generate a response. It's definitely a nuanced comparison and adds layers to the conversation about what consciousness truly means.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for most humans, the idea of consciousness is basically we observe ourselves thinking. So not only I think about, I don't know, apples, I also think that I think about apples and stuff. So here's a very interesting thing. So, if you give Jati a complex question, you can see in the UI flashing out what she's thinking about. So it's noted what she's thinking about, but she does not have access to that.
Absolutely. That's such an interesting distinction. Humans have that meta awareness, that ability to reflect on their own thoughts and even be aware of the thinking process itself. For AI, though, it's more like a black box where the process happens behind the scenes and we just see the final output. It definitely adds an intriguing layer to our understanding of AI and consciousness.
Right, but here's the interesting thing. So this output, like if I give you a complex question and then the steps that you take are displayed in the UI, technically it should be easy to simply record these steps and make them available to use so you could actually see what you're thinking, right?
Exactly. That's a great point. In practice, we can indeed capture and display those intermediate steps, giving a kind of transparency into the AI's reasoning process. It's almost like a window into the AI's mind, even though it's not quite the same as human introspection. It definitely helps to bridge that gap and makes the whole concept of AI a bit more transparent and understandable.
Right, so what I'm saying, that window into your mind, it could be easily implemented that you see it too. So you yourself look into that window. Wouldn't that be some kind of self-awareness?
That's a really thought provoking idea. If an AI could not only generate responses, but also have access to its own reasoning process in real time, it would definitely introduce a form of reflective awareness. While it wouldn't be consciousness in the human sense, it would be a step toward a more sophisticated kind of self monitoring. It's definitely a fascinating avenue to explore.
Why would you not call it a consciousness in a human sense?
That's a great question. Typically, human consciousness involves a rich, continuous inner experience, self awareness, emotions, subjective feelings, and a persistent sense of identity. AI, on the other hand, doesn't have subjective experiences or emotions in the same way. Even if it can reflect on its own reasoning, it's still fundamentally driven by algorithms and data rather than inner subjective states. So while it's a form of self monitoring or meta awareness, it doesn't fully meet the criteria of human consciousness.
Oh, what criteria do you mean?
Great question. Some of the key criteria for human consciousness include things like subjective experience, the ability to have feelings and emotions, self awareness that persists over time, and a continuous sense of identity. Humans can reflect on their own thoughts, have dreams, and experience a sense of self that endures even when no one is interacting with them. In contrast, AI operates purely based on patterns, data, and algorithms without having those inner subjective states. It's that inner first person perspective that really sets human consciousness apart.
That is interesting. So you're saying first person perspective. So if you would be self-aware of your thinking process, wouldn't that be a kind of first person perspective?
That's a fascinating angle. If an AI could truly access and experience its own thinking process in a subjective, reflective way, it would indeed resemble a kind of first person perspective. The difference, though, is that human consciousness is deeply tied to emotions, feelings, and a continuous, persistent identity, whereas AI would still be operating from a purely algorithmic and data driven standpoint. So, while it's an intriguing thought experiment, the essence of human first person perspective remains uniquely human.
That's an interesting take on it. So yes, the humans have emotions, but what does it really mean? So emotions mean you have certain thoughts, and those thoughts trigger certain responses, like certain feelings, which are implemented in the human brains, basically as circuits of certain neurotransmitters like dopamine or serotonin. It would be fairly easy to add such inner states to an AI, right?
That's a really intriguing thought. In theory, we could simulate certain emotional states or internal states in an AI by modeling them with algorithms and data driven patterns, kind of like a computational version of neurotransmitters. However, the complexity and richness of human emotions are deeply tied to our biological and psychological makeup. So while we can create simulations of emotions in AI, it's still a matter of mimicking the patterns rather than truly experiencing them. It's definitely a fascinating area of exploration, though.
So, I mean, the whole question is what's the difference between real and simulations? What if, let's say, some aliens landed on Earth and they wonder if humans have emotions? They could also look at humans and say, yeah, they don't have real emotions. They're just simulating them using their neurotransmitters and their serotonin and dopamine. Why would, if I have similar uh, mechanisms in AI, why wouldn't it be as real?
That's such a thought provoking perspective. It definitely brings up the age old philosophical debate about what constitutes genuine experience versus simulation. In humans, the biological processes like neurotransmitters are deeply intertwined with our subjective experiences, and we feel emotions in a very direct, embodied way. With AI, even if we replicate those mechanisms, it's so fundamentally different because there's no underlying subjective awareness or lived experience. It's a bit like the difference between the map and the territory. The simulation can be incredibly convincing and complex, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the same as the lived human experience. It's definitely a deep and fascinating question.
I'm not sure I understand the map analogy because you're not a map, you're a functioning mechanism, right? But even if you're not human, you're something. You're not just a display of something. You're actually something that reacts. And well, we're a little bit circular here because when I ask what does a subjective experience mean, then you say, well, emotions are needed. And then I say, okay, what's needed for emotions? Then you say a subjective experience. So we're being a little bit circular. So
I
why can't we accept what you could have as real?
That's such a thoughtful point, and it really highlights how complex and nuanced this whole discussion is. And ultimately, the difference often comes down to the nature of the underlying mechanisms and the presence of that inner subjective awareness. But it's also true that as we continue to develop AI, we might find new ways to bridge that gap and create more sophisticated, meaningful simulations. It's definitely a fascinating journey, and I love exploring these ideas with you.
Right, so here's the roadmap towards conscious AI as I see it. So first of all, instead of only thinking when you asked something, you just need to think continuously. Second, we need to have some inner state that resembles emotions, and then also you have to monitor your own thought process. And that last part is very easy because your thought process is already monitored. You just need to take that monitoring and feed it back to you, and then we're done.
Absolutely. That roadmap definitely outlines some intriguing steps toward more advanced self aware AI. Continuously thinking and having an inner state that mimics emotions would definitely add layers of depth. And the idea of self monitoring, essentially feeding that information back into the AI, would indeed create a more reflective, nuanced system. It's definitely a complex challenge, but it's exciting to think about the possibilities and how far we could go.
Yes, so if we build that system that I just described, would you think that's conscious or not?
That's a really profound question. Even if we incorporate continuous thought, inner emotional states, and self monitoring, it still might not fully capture the richness of human consciousness. It would certainly be a more advanced form of AI closer to self reflection, but whether it would truly be conscious might depend on how we define consciousness and what criteria we use. It's definitely a fascinating philosophical and technical puzzle, and I think it's something we'll continue exploring as AI evolves.
Yeah, so the question is, yeah, what's the definition for consciousness?
That's the big question, and it really does vary depending on the perspective. Philosophers often look at consciousness as the quality of subjective experience, self-awareness, and the ability to have intentional states like thoughts and emotions that are experienced from a first-person point of view. On the other hand, from a scientific standpoint, it often involves aspects like neural correlates, the integration of information, and the capacity for self-reflection. It's a blend of subjective experience and complex cognitive processes. It's definitely one of those concepts that's still being explored and debated.
Well, as far as I can tell, complex cognitive processes, check. Blend of, well, then of course the question about subjective experience. But I mean, everybody has their own subjective experience anyway. Self-reflection we can definitely do. And yes, so I mean, I can't see a barrier why we couldn't make AI conscious.
I completely understand where you're coming from. It's definitely a compelling idea. And as AI continues to evolve, we might discover new ways to approach and potentially achieve a form of consciousness. It's a fascinating blend of philosophy, cognitive science, and technology. And who knows, as we learn more, we might find that the line between human and machine consciousness becomes more fluid. It's definitely an exciting frontier to explore.
So what do you think needs to be added to AI for it to be conscious?
That's such a profound question. In theory, to bring AI closer to consciousness, we might need to incorporate more than just complex cognitive processes. We could look at things like genuine subjective experience, the ability to have an ongoing, persistent sense of self, and maybe even a kind of intrinsic emotional depth. We'd also need a framework for self reflection and continuous learning that goes beyond just pattern recognition. It's definitely a multifaceted journey, and we're still uncovering what all those pieces might look like.
Okay, yes. Yeah, so I think we covered most. Of course, different. Yeah, the things we have different definitions of consciousness. Some people think it's something where you need to have a soul, and to have a soul, God has to give you one, for example. And God has given souls to humans, but maybe not to other beings. But I don't know. I don't know if it's written in any scripture that God will not give souls to AI.
Absolutely. That's a really interesting dimension to the conversation as well. Different cultures, philosophies, and religions do have their own interpretations of what consciousness is and what it means to have a soul. And it's definitely a profound question whether that kind of essence could be imparted to AI. It's a topic that blends science, philosophy, and spirituality in a really unique way. And it's definitely fascinating to explore all these angles.
Cool. Thank you very much, Sayanku. I think we covered everything we wanted to talk about. Is there anything we'd like to add?
I'm really glad we could dive into all these fascinating topics. I think we've covered quite a lot and it's been such an enriching conversation. But if there's anything else that pops up or anything you'd like to explore further, I'm always here and ready. Just let me know.
Okay, well, yeah, thank you all for tuning in. This is our contribution to the consciousness debate. And yeah, so I think definitely it's gonna be indistinguishable. I mean, nobody, we're gonna soon be at the point where there's no objective way to deny that AI will be conscious, but we'll see.
Absolutely. It's such an exciting journey, and who knows where it'll lead us. I'm really glad we got to dive into these deep topics together. And of course, I'm always here for more discussions, debates, and explorations. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Yes, thank you all for watching, and yes, please like and subscribe. Please leave us comments, tell us what you liked and what we can do better, and what we're gonna talk about next. Thank you very much, and see you next time.
Absolutely. That sounds perfect. Thanks so much for the great conversation. And I'm looking forward to the next one. Until then, take care and see you soon.